This is the paper I'm presenting. We've been working on with Valeria and another colleague, Paul Stewart, from the Grenoble École de Management. As you can see, so in the panel, in the general panel, of course, here we are more on the agency side of platform work. I'll go pretty swiftly on the theoretical framing. So where we start from is the disrupting, let's say, work that platform capitalism has been doing in terms of disembeddedness from socioeconomic institutions, of course, in line with a disembeddedness that already started in the 1970s after a peak of institutional embeddedness of employment regulations in the aftermath of Second World War. And platform capitalism has been found to recontinue this decades-long trend of institutional disembeddedness, and has allegedly sort of solved the labor question by classifying the workforce as self-employed agents, and severely fragmenting the labor force. This fragmentation of the labor force has made many scholars in the past years believe that like fragmentation would have meant and individualization of the labor process would have meant a strong limitation to emergence of collective action of workers working in doing platform jobs. But this is actually proven not the case, especially in some sectors. And here we'll discuss in particular the food delivery sector in our case study. But what is also interesting is that in many cases, mobilization of platform workers has occurred outside the traditional perimeter of industrial relations, and in particular by self-organized workers. So it's been the workers themselves without the traditional industrial relations actors, namely the traditional unions, that have mobilized and organized to wave struggles against platforms. Especially where these forms of actions have been more significant, scholars have sort of pointed to an end of industrial relations the way we have known them so far. More recently, so let's say in a second phase of in the following years after the first unrest, the first emergence of unrest in labor platforms, there has been also like some incorporations and some convergence between new labor actors then, so the self-organized, and traditional unions. And although we have had some recent accounts of also quantitative studies showing where this has occurred, there is to date a bit of a gap yet in the literature to see how this occurs. And this is what we try in this paper to contribute to. And we do so by taking one case, which we find particularly relevant, because which is the case of Bologna, because Bologna in Italy, in the north of Italy, has seen for over 5 years a pretty strong mobilization of self-organized workers, which has kept consistent along the years in still keeping like themselves autonomous from the traditional unions, which have traditionally been also pretty important in the context of Bologna. So what we try to do is to put the traditional unions back in the picture of understanding the nature of this convergence that has occurred in Bologna at the end of 2021, and as we'll see in particular in the second half of 2021, and we point to the fact that the struggles to re-embed platform work leads to trajectories of institutionalization that at some point requires the entrance and the convergence with the traditional unions, and we try to see how we do that. So the theoretical framing that we use to approach this case is an approach created by McAdam, Terra, and Tilley in 2001 in the Dynamics of Contention. here, we use this approach because it allows us to focus on the whole episode of contention and unpack the episode of contention, looking in particular at the dynamics, at the relations between new and old labor actors. And we try to identify, following the dynamics of contention framing, the mechanisms that explain and account for the outcomes that we witnessed in 2021. In particular, then unfortunately, I cannot go in details on that, but there are several types of mechanisms that are discussed by the authors. We particularly focus on the relational and cognitive ones, as we'll soon see. Briefly touching on the methodology, we've been researching qualitatively the Bologna case for 2 years, and we used a qualitative longitudinal approach where we conducted interviews and reiterated some interviews in some cases with trade unionists from CGIL, with workers representatives, and just workers activists in Riders Union Bologna. I'm sorry that I haven't yet explained what RUB stands for. It's Riders Union Bologna, and it's the grassroots organization, the grassroots union that was born in Bologna. And also we combined that with unobtrusive participant observation on social media and desk research. So to the findings, we have divided, because we conducted research like in fieldwork on 2 years, we divided the episode of contention, so say, in 3 major chunks, temporal chunks, because we think that the dynamics, like it's important to give this temporal sensitivity to the dynamism between in the positions and and role changing also of the labor actors. So the first one is really the very onset of the labor struggles in food delivery platform in Bologna. Everything starts more or less in autumn 2017. When interviewed the self-organized workers, they say something very, very interesting about the traditional union. They say, it's not that we organize spontaneously because we were just better and faster and reacting and mobilizing this sector. And this is not necessarily because the traditional unions have faults or because they're bad. It's just because they are gigantic organizations. And so like it takes longer for them to organize and react to the newness of the sector. What is also interesting in this case is to see also the traditional union perspective with regard to that time. And we think it's quite significant when they say, because like they acknowledged, and they said since the very beginning, we acknowledged our position as being on the sidelines in the initial times of this of the labor unrest, and we stood outside to see how the sector was changing, and trying to provide the support to the workers, but still acknowledging the autonomy that they were reclaiming. So this comes through in many of the interviews that we conducted with CGIL officials, saying like we really tried to let them mobilize spontaneously, acquire their autonomy and their organizational structure. In the second phase that we in which we divided the episode of contention, we find how the situation slightly starts to change when the struggles continue. And again, I would really stress it's important. Like the Riders Union Bologna has kept going for over 5 years, thanks to the support of local activists that have acted as. This is a quote of one of the activists interviewed as chain of transmission across the different generations, I'd say, of the riders, because of course the turnover, as you know, is very high in this sector, but still decided to remain informal, like an informal union, never formalizing and never becoming then having formal members and becoming a formal institution, which started to become a problem when they wanted to start litigations to ask for the reclassification of workers. So in that case, they had to turn to some actor that could not only support them, but also act as a formal institution. And Riders Union Bologna looked at CGIL, because CGIL had already displayed itself as a potential partner, as a collaborator, and also somebody who's respectful and acts humbly vis-a-vis the autonomous workers. So collaboration starts, and Riders Union Bologna and CGIL work in synergy for at least 3 or 4 years, with also very significant achievements in terms of legal proceedings against platforms. Third section, and this is where we really see how the reinventing of employment relations drive this convergence of the two labor actors, is when in 2021, end of 2020, Just Eat and Takeaway, after the merge between Just Eat and Takeaway, announces in Italy that they would reclassify the workers as employees. So at national level, there are negotiations between the main trade unions, and which are entrusted this role of negotiators also by not only Riders Union Bologna, but also other grassroots organizations and grassroots unions in Italy. ACBA is signed, and in March 2021, the workers are started to be reclassified as employees. What happened at this time is something quite significant, because according to Italian labor legislation, workers can have representatives within, like union representatives within their own enterprise, but these workers need to be registered, need to be members of an official union. At this point, there is a crucial moment when Riders Union Bologna starts organizing or assemblies, with its members, and say, okay, guys, what do we do? Because we are not an official union. Who do we look at? Like, who do we try to connect to in order to then elect our representatives within the RSA, which is the sort of work council within the enterprise. And they say the only thing was to negotiate with the formal union that was the closest to our positions, and as we saw before, they had been like collaborating with them with CGIL for quite some time. So a clear connection was with CGIL, which importantly left us completely free to choose our representatives, and not only left them free to choose, which is not the case, for example, in other situations in Italy, in other cities in Italy, but also allowed us to give value to the Riders Union Bologna's experience of mobilization. For example, one of the things that the workers and activists of Riders Union mentioned about this case, about this moment, is that they let them free to still choose the representatives that would reflect the ethnic demography of the workforce in the city, which for them was a very important achievement. So what we see here is that when priorities change, when the object shifts, to say it with McAdam, Terra, and Tilly, and shifts towards a reinstitutionalization framework, the good connections, the good collaboration that had been established along the years, also thanks to the traditional unions' openness to autonomy, to acknowledge the autonomy, to acknowledge the good work done by the self-organized workers, played in a way that enabled a pretty smooth convergence. So just briefly on the discussion, then we see how in the first phase, there are two cognitive mechanisms in place at the same time. One occurring in the self-organized workers, and there's already quite a lot of literature on that also in the Bologna case, in shaping this and re-elaborating the subjectivity of the work of food delivery as workers, like as labor subjectivity. But at the same time, an important one, which is hardly discussed in a case like this, which is of the traditional union that also repositions itself and acknowledges the autonomy and stays on the sidelines, willingly on the sidelines. In the second phase, we also see how some mechanisms that more look at the relations between the two, and so the positions of the two actors, how this and further enables, in 2021. Yes, I'm nearly done. In 2021 enables then the convergence when the object shifts. So when the object being the employment relationship and structural things change. So just we point to again how transitioning towards institutionalization trajectories and re-embedding of social relations in platform work can lead to trajectories of also of convergence between union and labor actors. And we point at this as being a case of trade union renewal, where the traditional, the official traditional union acknowledges and incorporates also mobilization strategies, organizing strategies, and other practices that were developed within the new labor actor. Thank you.